She arrived in the small town just after sunrise, when the streets were still quiet and the cool morning air carried a calmness that helped her breathe easier. The charity event she had been invited to perform at was held in an old community hall near the center of town. From the outside, the building looked simple and worn, with chipped paint on the windowsills and a faded banner that hung loosely above the entrance. But she didn't mind. She had played in grand halls and tiny rooms alike, and she had learned long ago that the beauty of a place had nothing to do with the beauty of a performance. She stepped inside carrying her small bag, which held nothing more than a folded scarf, a bottle of water, and the sheet music she almost never used. She preferred to play from feeling rather than paper, but she kept the sheets out of habit. The backstage area was busy with young musicians tuning their instruments, warming up their voices, and chatting excitedly. Most of them seemed to know each other. They moved confidently, laughing loudly, boasting about their previous shows. She kept to the side, hoping to stay unnoticed. Her clothes were simple, comfortable slacks, a soft sweater, and flat shoes. She had never been interested in dressing to impress. Music, to her, had never been about shining on the outside. Still, as she quietly found a place to sit, she could feel eyes turning toward her. There was a certain energy young performers carried, and some of them enjoyed measuring others from a distance. Two young musicians nearby whispered to each other when they saw her. Their voices were not loud, but the room was quiet enough that she could still make out pieces of the conversation. One said something about her looking like someone's mother who had wandered backstage by mistake. The other joked that maybe she was here to help organize chairs or hand out programs. They snickered softly, not thinking she could hear. She kept her eyes down, calmly placing her bag beside her. She had been in the music world long enough to know how common judgment could be. People saw what they wanted to see. They expected great talent to arrive dressed in designer clothes, wearing expensive shoes, or with a confident posture that demanded attention. She had none of that. She moved gently, spoke softly, and preferred staying invisible until the moment she touched the piano. A volunteer approached her with a warm smile, asking if she needed anything. She shook her head politely and thanked him. He introduced himself, explaining that he loved the piano and had heard a lot about her. She gave a small smile back, grateful for one friendly face. He seemed surprised when she told him she didn't require special accommodations. Some performers were known to request specific lighting, a certain temperature in the room, or even a particular type of stool. She never asked for anything. All she ever needed was a working piano. As the room grew more crowded, she could hear more whispering from different corners. She didn't look up, but she could feel the energy shift around her. A group of young singers walked past, and one of them said loudly, "I didn't know they were letting older performers join the lineup. That's different." They laughed together, not hiding their amusement. She breathed in slowly and reminded herself that she was here to support a good cause, not to answer insults. She remembered what it was like when she had been their age. Full of energy, full of confidence, full of the belief that talent and youth always went together. She had once been just like them, but life had shown her otherwise. True music didn't depend on age. It depended on heart, time, and the quiet hours spent practicing alone when the world was asleep. A young man practicing a fast piece on the piano glanced at her between notes. He seemed puzzled by her presence, maybe unsure whether she belonged here at all. After finishing his run, he stood up and stretched, looking at her again before saying to his friends, "She probably plays those old songs people used to like. Nothing exciting." They nodded, not even waiting to hear her play before forming their opinions. She continued sitting quietly, her hands resting gently on her lap. She didn't blame them. They were young, full of fire, and eager to prove themselves. The world had taught them that competition mattered more than empathy. She didn't take their words personally, though they did sting a little. She had spent her entire life learning to translate invisible feelings into sound. And ironically, people who hadn't lived long enough to understand those feelings often judged her the fastest. When sound checks began, she moved closer to the side of the stage. She didn't want to disturb anyone, so she kept her steps silent, staying out of the way. The stage manager asked everyone to line up according to the order of performance. She was placed somewhere in the middle. Some performers seemed surprised, thinking she would be at the very end, or maybe not listed at all. One girl approached her with a sweet smile, asking if she needed help understanding the schedule. The girl didn't mean harm. She was simply assuming she lacked experience. She thanked her gently and said she understood everything clearly. The girl nodded politely, though her eyes still held confusion. The hall grew louder as families and guests began arriving. She could hear the buzz in the distance. People talking, children running, staff making final arrangements. She felt a familiar mix of peace and anticipation. Performing had always been a special experience for her. Even after many years, she still felt a quiet thrill knowing she would soon share something meaningful with a room full of strangers. While she waited for her turn, she closed her eyes for a moment. Not to block out the noise, not to hide, but simply to reconnect with the feeling she always searched for before performing. It wasn't nerves. It was something deeper, a memory of why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. She remembered sitting at her first piano as a child, touching the keys and feeling the strange but wonderful power of sound. She remembered practicing for hours while everyone else played outside. She remembered the teachers who encouraged her, and the nights when she wondered whether all the effort would ever matter. Music had always been her way of speaking without needing many words. But here, backstage in a room full of people who didn't recognize her, she felt more invisible than she expected. Still, she wasn't angry. She knew the truth would reveal itself on stage. She didn't need to defend her place. The piano would do that for her. A stagehand came over to check whether everyone felt ready. Most of the younger performers nodded confidently. She simply gave a small nod of her own. She noticed the stagehand giving her a second look, as if trying to remember why her name seemed familiar. But he didn't say anything. As she waited, she took a slow breath and listened to the echoes of the hall beyond the curtain. She wasn't here to prove anything. She wasn't here to win anyone's approval. She was here because someone had invited her to help bring people together for a cause bigger than herself. Still, she couldn't fully ignore the quiet hum of judgment around her. The whispers, the amused glances, the assumptions. They all formed a soft background noise behind her thoughts. She knew the young performers didn't mean to be cruel. They were simply unaware. They didn't know her journey. They didn't know how many years of discipline lived in her hands. They didn't know how many hours she had poured into perfecting her craft. But they would. The moment she touched the piano, all of it would become clear. For now, she sat patiently, waiting for her moment, letting the noise fade into the distance as she prepared herself for what truly mattered: the music. The backstage area grew busier as the event drew closer, and the energy in the room shifted from casual chatter to restless excitement. Performers fixed their clothes, practiced a few last notes, and paced in small circles to release nervous energy. She stayed in her quiet corner, trying to keep her thoughts steady even as the noise around her grew louder. A few of the younger performers kept glancing in her direction, still puzzled by her presence. Some whispered again, their voices low but not low enough to be missed. One said he was sure she must be someone who came along with a family, maybe there to watch a child perform. Another responded that he didn't understand why she was sitting among the performers if she wasn't one. Their confusion came not from malice but from assumptions that ran too deep. She had played in rooms like this many times before, places where people judged each other based on surface appearances. She had learned not to let it bother her. But even then, the comments brushed against her heart in small ways she couldn't fully ignore. It wasn't pain. It was something lighter, a quiet sadness that people rushed to label others before truly seeing them. A young violinist walked by holding his instrument case against his chest as if it were a prized treasure. He gave her a quick, polite smile, but the confusion in his eyes remained. He wasn't sure who she was, and he didn't seem interested in finding out. Behind him, two singers whispered that they hoped their performance wouldn't be placed near hers, joking that her slow piano style might put the audience to sleep. They laughed softly, thinking she wouldn't notice. She did notice, but she didn't react. She had learned long ago that responding to such comments only added fuel to unnecessary fires. Her mind was focused on the music she would soon share. She reminded herself of why she agreed to perform here, to support an event that raised funds for a meaningful cause, one she believed in. That purpose mattered far more than the opinions of people who didn't know her story. A staff member carrying a clipboard walked toward her. He paused for a moment when he saw her, scanning the list in his hand. His eyebrows lifted slightly in realization. "You're the pianist," he said softly, a hint of surprise in his voice. She nodded. He apologized quickly, explaining that he had expected someone else. Someone younger, someone dressed differently. She smiled with understanding. It was not the first time she'd heard such a thing. He guided her to a different area where performers were lining up for rehearsal. She thanked him and followed quietly. As she passed through the room, the chatter behind her changed. Whispered questions rippled through the groups of performers. "She's performing? Is she really on the list? What does she even play?" Their voices carried a mix of curiosity and disbelief. She stayed calm, letting the words float past her. The piano had always been her grounding place, and the thought of the keys beneath her fingers steadied her heart. Still, she could sense the growing judgment in the room, like a small storm gathering just overhead. When rehearsal began, she waited patiently as the younger performers took turns practicing. Some sang with strong voices full of ambition. Others played instruments with fast fingers and dramatic posture. They were eager to impress. She watched them with quiet appreciation, knowing they were still at the stage of life where showing off felt important. Every now and then, performers eyed her from the corner of their eyes, wondering what she could possibly add to the show. A few exchanged skeptical looks. One whispered that maybe she was going to play something very basic, the kind beginners learned. Another snickered, saying that perhaps she was here because the organizers wanted to include everyone. When it was finally her turn to rehearse, the host called her name gently. Some performers turned, surprised to hear her being addressed as one of them. She stepped toward the piano, moving slowly and gracefully. A few people instantly quieted down, expecting to see something amusing. Others looked uninterested, already anticipating that her music would be simple. The piano keys felt slightly cold under her fingertips as she tested them. She pressed a few notes, checking the sound, but didn't begin playing her full piece. She didn't want to reveal the performance before its time. Some of the younger performers saw her gentle testing of notes and misunderstood it as hesitation. "She looks nervous," one whispered. Another added, "Maybe she forgot how to play." She didn't correct them. Instead, she adjusted the bench height and gave a small nod to the host, signaling that she was done rehearsing. It seemed to confuse many of the performers. They expected a show, something flashy or dramatic. But she preferred saving her energy for the real moment, when the hall would be full and the performance would matter. As she walked back to her seat, a young woman approached her with a curious expression. "Are you really performing tonight?" she asked, not rudely but with genuine surprise. The pianist simply nodded. The young woman stared for a long moment, as if trying to figure out where she had seen her before. When she couldn't place the memory, she said nothing more and walked away. She sat quietly, hands folded, feeling a mix of calm and anticipation settle inside her. She had learned that people sometimes needed to see something before believing it. Words rarely convinced them. Appearances rarely won them over. But a moment of truth when the music began could shift everything. One of the performers, a confident guitarist, spoke loudly to a group near the corner. "These shows are getting strange," he said. "I mean, look around. Half the lineup looks like they're from a different world. And then there's her." He tilted his head toward the pianist. "Watch her try to play something old-fashioned and slow. The audience won't even pay attention." Someone giggled. Someone else nodded. She heard every word, yet her face remained calm. Not because she was unaffected, but because she had learned long ago that silence could be louder than any reply. She reminded herself that music had a way of rearranging people's perceptions without needing a single spoken answer. A kind volunteer, the same one who had greeted her earlier, approached again. He asked if she was feeling comfortable and told her not to mind the chatter around the room. He knew who she was. He had listened to her recordings many times. He understood the depth of her talent even if the others didn't. He gave her a reassuring smile, and she returned a grateful one. Hours passed slowly as performers prepared mentally for the evening. The crowd outside grew larger. The sound of footsteps, excited voices, and chairs being arranged echoed through the hall. The event was gaining life. Meanwhile, she stayed grounded in her little space, breathing steadily, letting her mind drift to the music she would soon share. She replayed the melody in her thoughts, letting it flow through her like a calm river. It brought her peace, reminding her that nothing else mattered when she played. But even in that calm state, she couldn't ignore the constant buzz of whispers around her. Some performers wondered aloud if she would face embarrassment on stage. Others joked quietly that perhaps she would surprise them, and they said it sarcastically, not believing it for a second. They didn't know what she carried inside the quiet movements of her hands. She noticed the event coordinator looking at her with a curious expression. Maybe he had heard about her, maybe not. But he approached her with politeness, telling her that she would be performing after one of the younger acts. "Take your time on stage," he said kindly. "No rush. We want everyone to feel appreciated tonight." His words offered a small comfort. As performers were called one by one to the stage for final checks, she observed them closely. Some shook with nerves. Some walked with exaggerated confidence. Some looked around anxiously for reassurance. She remembered those days too. Days when she used to wonder whether she belonged, whether people saw her worth. Now she understood that worth wasn't something people gave or took. It lived quietly inside, shaped by time, patience, and countless hours at the piano. The chatter around her continued, but she no longer felt bothered. She felt ready. The disrespect, the assumptions, the misunderstandings, they would all melt away once the music began. All she needed was the moment when the stage lights dimmed, the hall fell silent, and her fingers touched the keys. Then, everything would change. The hall slowly filled with people, and the sounds from the audience drifted backstage like a soft wave. Children whispered excitedly. Parents settled into their seats, and volunteers moved from row to row making sure everything was in order. From behind the curtain, she could hear bits of conversation. People asking about the lineup, wondering what kind of performances they would see tonight. Backstage, the atmosphere was a mix of nerves and excitement. Performers stood in small groups, some practicing lines under their breath, others humming to check their pitch. The younger musicians kept adjusting their clothes, making sure their hair looked perfect, checking their reflection in the shiny metal of their instruments. She remained in her quiet spot, hands resting gently on her lap. She listened to the murmurs around her, not to absorb them but to let the world settle into a natural rhythm before her moment arrived. She had always found that observing the world before stepping into the spotlight helped her calm her thoughts. One of the singers walked past her, whispering to a friend. "Do you think she'll actually go through with it?" The friend shrugged. "Who knows? Maybe she'll freeze up when she gets on stage." They laughed softly as they moved away. She took a slow breath, not out of nerves but out of habit. Breathing kept her centered. She never allowed other people's expectations to control how she felt. Still, she understood why they doubted her. They saw someone quiet, someone older, someone who didn't fit their image of a performer. Appearances were loud. People often trusted them more than truth. The first performer went on stage, a young guitarist with fast fingers and bright confidence. His music drifted backstage, warm and energetic. Some performers backstage clapped when he finished. Others complimented him enthusiastically when he returned. He smiled proudly, clearly happy with the reaction. Next came a singing group, harmonizing beautifully, their voices blending in a way that showed weeks of practice. The crowd applauded loudly, and backstage the energy grew even more intense. She watched each performance with genuine appreciation. Every performer gave something honest on stage, even if they were unaware of how their words earlier might have sounded to her. She wasn't here to judge anyone. She was here to play, to share a moment of music that came from years of experience, joy, and struggle. A stagehand came to check the lineup again, making sure everyone was ready. When he reached her, he gave a small nod of recognition. "You're next after the next act," he said gently. She thanked him with a soft smile. The two performers before her, a duo playing a lively piece, whispered excitedly as they rehearsed their entrance. One of them looked at her briefly, curiosity flickering in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. As the duo took the stage, she stood slowly, stretching her fingers slightly. This was her quiet ritual before every performance. She didn't pace or rehearse nervously. She simply moved her fingers gently, waking up the rhythm she carried inside. The volunteer who had been kind to her earlier saw her and smiled reassuringly. "You'll do great," he said softly. She nodded and thanked him. She appreciated small kindnesses. They were like warm lights in moments otherwise filled with noise. The sound of applause indicated that the duo had finished. The coordinator stepped onto the stage to introduce the next performer. She listened closely, though she already knew what was coming. Still, hearing her name spoken aloud in front of the crowd created a shift in her heartbeat. A familiar, steady drum of anticipation. When the coordinator announced her, the reaction backstage was subtle but noticeable. A few surprised glances, a few raised eyebrows, a few murmurs. "She's really performing? What is she going to play? This is interesting." Most didn't expect much. Some didn't expect anything at all. But none of that mattered. She stepped toward the stage entrance. Her steps were calm, her posture relaxed. The curtain felt heavy as it brushed gently against her shoulder. She paused only for a breath, not to gather courage, but to align her heart with the music she was about to share. When she stepped onto the stage, the lighting softened around her. The hall was full, rows of people watching, their faces lit by curiosity more than anything else. She could feel the weight of their eyes, but it didn't make her uneasy. She had stood in rooms like this countless times. The spotlight didn't scare her. It invited her. From the corner of her eye, she noticed some of the younger performers peeking through the side curtain, their faces filled with a mix of disbelief and interest. For the first time, they seemed to see her as more than someone waiting quietly backstage. She walked toward the piano slowly, letting each step carry meaning. She didn't rush, didn't force confidence. Her calm nature was genuine, and the hall responded to it. A hush fell over the audience. Not out of awe, but because they weren't sure what to expect. Curiosity created silence. She reached the piano bench and gently ran her fingers along the back of it before sitting down. The piano looked beautiful under the soft stage lights, its glossy surface reflecting her calm face. The moment she sat, something shifted inside her. The piano had always been more than an instrument. It was a friend, a voice, a home. When she sat at that bench, the world faded into the background, leaving only the feeling of music. She adjusted the bench height slightly, placing it just the way she liked. Her shoes brushed the pedals softly as she tested their movement. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment, letting herself breathe. The audience waited, quiet and curious. She looked at the keys, not to check their alignment or prepare mentally, but because she felt a sense of gratitude every time she saw a piano ready for her. It reminded her of all the years she spent learning, practicing, growing. She closed her eyes lightly and let her fingers hover over the keys. The room grew even quieter. Not a whisper, not a cough, not a rustle. Even the younger performers backstage seemed frozen, as if waiting to see what she would do. She pressed the first note. It was soft, warm, and full of feeling. The sound floated through the hall, gentle but steady. People leaned forward slightly, almost subconsciously. The note carried emotion, but not in a dramatic way, more like a quiet truth. When her second note followed, it blended perfectly with the first. Then a third, then a fourth, and soon, a melody began to form. Each note felt like a small breath, each pause like a heartbeat. Her fingers moved with ease, not fast, not showy, but with a depth that only time could create. The sound grew fuller, richer, as she added layers to the melody. Her body swayed gently with each phrase, her eyes closed, her expression calm. Backstage, the whispers stopped completely. The young guitarist, who had joked earlier about her performance being boring, stood still, eyebrows lifted in surprise. The singers who had laughed about her earlier found themselves leaning toward the curtain, unable to look away. Even the performers who hadn't paid her any attention before now listened intently, their earlier judgments slipping away. In the audience, something shifted too. People who had initially looked at her with mild curiosity now watched her with growing respect. Her music carried something beyond skill. It carried experience, emotion, and a quiet courage that didn't need to be announced to be felt. Her fingers moved across the keys like they belonged there. She didn't rush, didn't try to impress. She simply let the music speak the way it wanted to. And the room accepted it, embraced it. Near the middle of the piece, she played a progression that rose gently but powerfully, like a soft wave lifting toward a calm shore. It made the audience hold their breath without realizing it. The melody deepened, pulling listeners in with its sincerity. Her hands moved gracefully, shaping each moment with care. And though she couldn't see the audience, she could feel their connection. The quiet understanding that filled the space between them. The younger performers watching from backstage felt something unexpected. They had never imagined that someone as quiet and gentle as her could play with such richness. Their earlier assumptions began to crumble silently, and she kept playing. Every note she played told a small part of her story, not through words, but through feeling. She didn't need applause. She didn't need recognition. She only needed the music to flow honestly. The melody softened gradually, like a sunset fading into calm darkness. Her hands slowed, her fingers pressing the final notes with tenderness. When the last note drifted into silence, the hall remained still for a moment. Then everything changed. The days leading up to the performance felt both short and endlessly long for her. Every morning she woke up before the sun, sitting at the old piano in the corner of her room, practicing until her fingers felt warm enough to trust. She didn't push herself out of fear or pressure. She pushed herself because she wanted to prove, at least to herself, that she still had something real inside her. Something no mocking comment or cold stare could ever take away. She kept replaying that moment at the rehearsal, when people whispered and stared, expecting her to fail. Instead of breaking her confidence, it made her even more certain that she had to show everyone what they didn't bother to see. She knew that the upcoming concert wasn't just another show. It was the moment where she would stand on a stage in front of people who had already decided they knew her story. It was her chance to tell it the right way, not with words but with music. During the last full rehearsal before the event, the hall was crowded with performers, organizers, and assistants walking around with clipboards. She sat quietly on the far end, waiting for her turn, watching others play with ease. The room felt filled with confidence, but not all of it felt genuine. She could see how some performers tried too hard to impress, adding extra flourishes, smiling too wide, rushing through notes just to seem talented. Yet she remained calm, resting her hands in her lap, breathing slowly. When her name was called, the room grew unexpectedly silent. Even those who had been ignoring her turned to look. She stepped forward with steady steps, sat down, and placed her hands on the keys. She didn't try to impress anyone, didn't attempt anything flashy. She simply played the short piece she had chosen, a quiet, thoughtful tune that revealed more depth than volume. The room listened, perhaps surprised by how gentle yet steady her playing was. When she finished, she didn't look up to see their expressions. She just nodded respectfully and walked back to her seat. She didn't need their approval yet. She needed to save her real performance for the night of the concert. That evening, she sat at home with a warm cup of tea, staring at the piano in front of her. She thought about the path that had led her here, how she used to play confidently in front of crowds without worrying about what anyone thought. Back then, music felt like a friend. When people praised her, it wasn't for her looks, personality, or background. It was for the sound she created. Now, facing strangers who judged her without knowing her, she understood more deeply what music meant to her. It wasn't about being admired. It was about speaking her truth. The night of the concert arrived faster than she expected. The backstage area buzzed with energy, performers adjusting outfits, warm UPS echoing through the hallways, producers giving last-minute notes. Lights flashed, doors opened and closed, people rushed from one corner to another. But in the middle of all that noise, she stood quietly, hands clasped together, breathing slowly. When she peeked through the curtain at the audience, she felt a wave of nervousness. The hall was full. Some people had come for entertainment, some for support, and some simply to judge. She recognized a few of the faces that had mocked her earlier. They sat casually in their seats, chatting and laughing, with no idea that the person they doubted would soon take the stage. Her turn was still a while away. She sat in a small chair near the backstage wall, eyes closed, imagining the piano keys under her fingers. She ran through the song in her mind, not just the notes, but the feeling behind each one. She wasn't worried about mistakes. She was more focused on capturing the emotion she wanted to deliver. When the performer before her finished and walked backstage, she heard someone whisper, "Let's see how she plans to survive this crowd." Another voice muttered something about her not looking like someone who belonged on a grand stage. She didn't react. Instead, she let their words float past her like wind. She knew that once she sat at the piano, none of their comments would matter. Finally, the host called her name. She walked slowly toward the stage entrance. The lights were bright, the applause mild but polite. She stepped out, bowed lightly, and took her place at the grand piano. The hall was silent. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the cool surface against her fingertips. The first note she played was soft, almost fragile, but steady. The hall listened. Her fingers moved gracefully, building the melody slowly, letting each sound linger long enough to reach every corner of the room. People leaned forward. Those who had mocked her earlier felt their expressions change without even realizing it. The calm, gentle sound filled the hall like a warm breeze. Each note carried layers of emotion. Pain, healing, hope, determination. She wasn't just playing a song. She was telling her story in a language only music could translate. Halfway through, she shifted into a deeper, richer tone. The melody rose with strength, surprising many who expected her to stay quiet and soft. Her hands moved more confidently now, drawing out every ounce of emotion she had stored inside her. She didn't look at the audience, but she could feel their silence, their attention, their sudden respect. When she reached the final part, the hall felt different. Something had changed. People weren't watching her to judge anymore. They were watching because they couldn't look away. Her music had captured them. She ended the piece with a gentle final note that floated through the air like a soft farewell. For a moment, the hall remained completely still. No clapping, no whispering, just silence. And then, the applause broke. It wasn't polite applause. It was loud, strong, and heartfelt, coming from people who realized they had underestimated someone who hadn't tried to prove anything except the truth of her own talent. She stood up, bowed, and felt her chest warm with something she hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Not because people approved of her now, but because she had shared something real and honest. As she walked backstage, some of the performers who had whispered about her earlier avoided her eyes. Others looked at her with a kind of quiet respect. But she didn't stop to take in their reactions. Her mind was still filled with the echo of the song she had just played. She found a quiet corner at the back of the hall and sat down, letting her heartbeat return to normal. She didn't need anyone to tell her she had done well. She had felt it in every note. But little did she know, her performance wasn't just admired. It was already being talked about outside the hall. A few audience members recorded a portion of it, sharing it online within minutes. What she thought would be a simple performance was already beginning to reach more people than she ever imagined. And while she sat there quietly, unaware of how much her life was about to change, the world outside the hall was reacting with the same speechless awe the audience inside had felt. Part 5 would show her just how far a moment of honesty and courage could travel. The applause from the hall still echoed in the air long after she stepped away from the piano. Even as she walked backstage, the energy of the room seemed to follow her like a warm wave. People were still standing, still clapping, still trying to understand how someone they had judged so quickly could hold so much talent inside her. She moved slowly down the hallway, catching her breath, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. Her hands were still slightly trembling, not from fear but from the intensity of the moment. For a long time she had learned to keep her emotions hidden, but what had just happened on that stage touched her more deeply than she expected. She reached a quiet corner backstage and leaned against the wall for a moment. She closed her eyes, letting herself feel the relief of knowing she had done what she came here to do. She had not only played a song, she had shown them who she truly was. She had reminded herself too, in a way. Even when people doubted her, even when they whispered and pointed, she still carried something powerful inside, something no one could take away. She didn't have long to stay in that quiet moment. Soon, footsteps began to approach. Soft ones at first, then a few louder ones. She opened her eyes to see several of the young musicians who had mocked her earlier. The same people who had dismissed her, questioned her presence, and laughed behind her back. Now they were standing there with their expressions completely changed. None of them carried the same smug confidence they had before. Their shoulders were lower, their faces serious, almost embarrassed. One of them stepped forward, clearing his throat. His voice shook a little as he tried to speak. He said they hadn't known who she really was. He said they had no idea she had so much experience and talent. He admitted they had judged her too quickly, and it wasn't fair. The others nodded behind him, their eyes lowered. It was clear they were ashamed of the way they had acted. She listened quietly, not saying a word at first. She didn't need to fill the silence. They needed to say what they had come to say. She could see they were not pretending. Their apology was real. And even though they had hurt her earlier in the day, she felt no anger anymore. She knew what it felt like to be underestimated. She knew how easy it was for people to look at someone and make assumptions without understanding anything about their story. When they finished apologizing, she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but steady. She told them she wasn't angry. She told them she had once been young too, and she understood that people sometimes judge without thinking. But she reminded them gently that they should never look at someone's face, clothes, or age and decide their worth. Everyone carries a history that is invisible at first glance. Everyone has something special inside, whether it's talent, experience, or simply a quiet strength. The young musicians nodded again, taking in her words. Some of them looked like they were learning this lesson for the first time in their lives. One of them even looked emotional, as if her performance had awakened something in him. She didn't try to lecture them, but her presence alone made them rethink everything they had believed earlier that day. After the group left, a staff member approached her. He had seen everything from the start and had tried to defend her earlier when others mocked her. He now stood with a warm smile on his face, proud of how she handled everything. He told her that her performance had changed the atmosphere of the entire event. People outside were still talking about her playing, still amazed by the feeling in her music. He said the audience wasn't just impressed, they were deeply moved. She thanked him with a grateful smile. She appreciated that he had tried to help her before anyone knew who she was. It meant more to her than he realized. Kindness in a moment of judgment always stood out. It was easy to be kind to someone who was already respected. It was much harder to defend someone who seemed unimportant in the eyes of others. Eventually, she walked back out toward the lobby, where the audience was scattered around talking and waiting for the next part of the event. As soon as people saw her, the room shifted again. They stopped their conversations and turned toward her. Many of them approached her with shining eyes, thanking her for her performance. Some said her music reminded them of moments in their own lives. Others said they had never heard anyone play with so much emotion. A few even seemed speechless, unsure how to express what they felt. She accepted every word with quiet grace. She didn't boast or show off. She simply smiled, shook hands, and exchanged a few gentle words. She loved music, not attention. But she knew that moments like this mattered, not for her ego but for the connection music could create between people. After a while, she stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sky was beginning to dim, and the soft breeze helped her finally relax after such an intense day. She walked a little farther away from the building, taking in the calm surroundings. The event hall behind her glowed with warm lights, and the distant sound of chatter floated through the open doors. She thought about everything that had happened since morning. The whispers, the stares, the doubts, the performance, the applause, the apologies. Every moment felt like part of a bigger picture, something that reminded her of why she had chosen this path in the first place. Music wasn't just notes or rhythms. It was a language that spoke to people without needing words. It touched hearts, broke down assumptions, and reminded people of what truly mattered. She took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. She felt peaceful now. She wasn't bothered by the way she had been treated earlier. If anything, she felt grateful that she had the chance to show them something they might remember for a long time. Maybe the young musicians would treat others differently from now on. Maybe they would think twice before laughing at someone. Maybe they had learned something valuable from the experience. And if they had, then the day had been worth more than any applause. Before she left, the event organizer came out to find her. He hurried across the parking area, calling out to her with a warm smile. He thanked her deeply for accepting the invitation and for giving the audience such a memorable moment. He said her performance had become the highlight of the entire event and that people would be talking about it for weeks. She thanked him in return, saying she appreciated the opportunity to share her music. She didn't mention anything about the way she had been treated earlier. There was no need. In the end, the music had spoken for her. It had silenced every doubt without her raising her voice once. As she walked toward her car, she felt a quiet pride settle in her chest. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demanded recognition, just a simple, warm feeling of knowing she had done something meaningful. She had played from the heart and it had reached people. That was all she needed. Before she got in the car, she paused for a final moment and looked back at the building. She smiled softly. The day had started with judgment, but it ended with respect. It was a reminder to herself and to everyone who had watched her that true talent never needs to shout. It reveals itself when the time is right. With that peaceful thought, she got into her car and drove away, leaving behind an evening filled with lessons, music, and newfound understanding. An evening no one there would soon forget.